I feel like Kody and Robyn probably have some plan of what they want to do and how they want to handle it. I think that Janelle has some sort of plan, and I know that I do as well. And none of us are talking to each other because none of us trust each other.
What happens when the cameras stop rolling, but the truth keeps recording when the perfect marriage begins to rot from the inside and the last loyal wives decide silence is no longer survival, but surrender? In this story, a forgotten mic captures KodyBrown's most raw confession, Robyn's mask slips, and a secret showdown turns sister wives into a battlefield of betrayal. This isn't just drama, it's the unraveling of a dynasty built on denial. The house was supposed to be quiet, filming head-wrapped. The producers were gone, boom mics tucked away, lights dimmed, crew trucks already rumbling out of the cul-de-sac. But one thing hadn't been shut off. The tiny mic still clipped to the inside of Kody's shirt. It was a careless oversight, or maybe fate's cruel trick slouched against the arm of the couch. His body sagged like a deflated balloon, half of his shirt untucked, as if even his appearance had finally given up the performance. He rubbed his temples, exhaling like the weight of 20 years had just collapsed on his spine. Then quietly he muttered, "This whole thing is disgusting." Robyn, standing stiff across the room, arms folded like iron gates, didn't let it slide. "What did you just say?" Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The challenge was sharp enough to cut through concrete. Kody didn't lift his head. "The way we function," he said slowly, like spitting out poison. "The show, the lies, you, me, all of it." A crack formed not in the silence, but in the illusion. Robyn blinked, taking half a step back, as if his words had slapped her. "So now you're blaming me?" she asked, her tone brittle. Kody's reply wasn't loud, but it was lethal. "You misrepresent everything. You cry, then manipulate, and I'm the one choking on it." It wasn't rage. It was something colder, exhaustion laced with clarity, the kind of moment where love dies without ceremony, where the truth slips out because there's no energy left to contain it. And unbeknownst to either of them, that truth was being recorded, unfiltered, unscripted, and devastating. The fairy tale they built hadn't just fractured, it was already falling in slow motion, and the mic never stopped listening. The mic wasn't the only thing that betrayed Robyn. Later that night, in the quiet of her bedroom, she vented to a trusted producer, unaware that a hidden backup recorder on a nearby bookcase was still running. Her voice, once carefully curated for cameras, cracked with fury. "He really called me," she said, barely holding back a sob. But her sorrow quickly twisted into something sharper. "Janelle's out there acting like she's a pioneer woman with a martyr complex, and Meri, she's like a tragic Victorian ghost." The venom in her words wasn't just personal, it was deliberate. Her mask was slipping, and underneath wasn't heartbreak, it was disdain. She paced the room, ranting about how she was the one keeping the family together, the one still showing up, the only one Kody should have defended. "They ought to give me credit," she snapped. "I kept this whole circus going." She laughed, but it was hollow, the kind of laugh that covers rot. That's when the audio file, now infamously labeled Clip 14, Do Not Delete, found its way into the hands of a former show editor. No return address, just a flash drive in a plain envelope. Curiosity turned into shock, and within hours, the unedited confession was leaking into the dark corners of Reddit. By morning, the internet was ablaze. Fans were no longer speculating. They were listening, hearing Robyn mock the same women she used to call sister wives, hearing the cracks she'd tried to cover with tears. The woman framed as Kody's long-suffering soulmate had taken off her crown, and underneath was something else entirely. This wasn't an edit. This was real, and once heard, it couldn't be unheard. In a single night, the balance of power shifted. The audience wasn't watching Robyn anymore. They were dissecting her. Janelle didn't need the full clip to know what it meant. She had lived it, but hearing Robyn call her a martyr with a complex that hit different. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly what Robyn would say when she thought no one was watching, alone in her kitchen. Fingers trembling, Janelle pressed play again. Her laughter wasn't amusement, it was release. The confirmation that years of gut instinct weren't paranoia, they were prophecy. She had watched Kody unravel for years, watched Robyn rise in his orbit while the rest of them were left to orbit the wreckage. But this proved it was never about love. It was about control, and even Robyn the chosen one was no longer immune to Kody's disgust. Across the state line, Christine's call came through. No preamble, just emotion. "Have you heard it?" And Janelle knew they were finally on the same page. For years, they both made sacrifices, some silent, some public, but always hoping the family could hold. That loyalty meant something, but now the illusion was dead. Christine was done pretending, done excusing, done watching Robyn cry on cue while manipulating behind. The scenes, the mask had slipped, and underneath they saw the same thing, a woman who was never really one of them, just someone who played the part long enough to consolidate power. Meanwhile, in Parowan, Meri stared at a printout of the transcript like it was a gravestone. Robyn's words weren't just cruel, they were final. For years, Meri had held on to slivers of hope that if she stayed long enough, loyal enough, she'd be seen again. But hearing herself described as a tragic Victorian ghost wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. And something in her broke not with drama, but with clarity. Meri didn't need a family that wrote her out behind closed doors. She needed to finally walk through one. No one expected the fallout to go public, but it did, and it hit the internet like a detonation. The leaked audio, raw and damning, was posted anonymously, but circulated faster than any sanctioned TLC teaser ever had. Reddit threads erupted. Instagram reels looped Kody's hoarse voice, calling Robyn ick, spliced against footage of her wiping away tears on camera. What had once been carefully curated drama was now something more dangerous, truth unscripted, and the fans, they weren't just consuming. They were connecting dots, sharing timestamps, dragging Robyn in comment sections with a rage that felt almost personal. The mask had slipped, and no amount of PR gloss could reattach it. Inside TLC's boardroom, chaos brewed. Legal teams whispered about NDAs and breach clauses, but producers saw something else. A ratings goldmine. This wasn't a scandal, it was a pivot. One executive muttered, "We don't need a script anymore, this is the story." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a former editor admitted he'd been the one to leak it. Quietly through a burner account, not out of revenge, out of relief. The burden of knowing too much and saying too little had finally snapped. What he uploaded wasn't just audio. It was a reckoning back in Flagstaff. Janelle's group chat with her kids lit up with links and captions. Even the younger ones, often shielded from the darkest corners of the drama, were now front-row witnesses to their parents unraveling. Gabe, usually so reserved, simply sent, "He really said it." It wasn't shock, it was validation. Years of being sidelined, dismissed, forgotten. Now they had proof, and Janelle, standing in her living room with that clip echoing through her phone, wasn't devastated. She was calm, a storm that had finally passed. Not because it was over, but because the truth had finally landed where it belonged. Out in the open, Meri read the transcript 3 times. Each word felt like a stone laid on her chest. She'd endured Kody's silence, his withdrawal, his cruelty. But hearing Robyn, the sister wife she once welcomed with open arms, call her a tragic Victorian ghost wasn't just cruel. It was surgical, calculated betrayal had a voice now, and it wasn't Kody's. It was Robyn's, pitched in scorn, soaked in self-righteousness. And somehow that hurt more, because with Kody, Meri always expected abandonment. But with Robyn, she had hoped for sisterhood, for solidarity, for even a sliver of kindness. For years, Meri existed on the margins of a marriage that no longer included her. Her affection was met with obligation, her loyalty ignored, but she stayed out of faith, out of fear, out of inertia. Now she realized Robyn didn't just tolerate her silence, she thrived on it. She built her throne on the backs of women who wouldn't fight back. That was the game, and Meri had finally stopped playing. She opened her laptop, the weight of quiet years pressing against her fingers. No producers, no filter, just her voice. It trembled, but it didn't break. "I'm not a ghost," she said softly, but with finality. "And I'm not desperate. I was devoted, I was misled, and I stayed too long." She paused, looking somewhere past the screen, into the space where trust used to live. "But I won't stay quiet anymore. You tried to erase me, but I still exist. I still matter." In that moment, Meri reclaimed something she hadn't touched in years. Herself, not the wife, not the cast member, not the afterthought, just Meri. And if Robyn thought the mic only recorded Kody's confession, she was wrong. The echo was wider. It reverberated into every corner, where silence once ruled and shattered it. Janelle sat at her kitchen counter, fingers trembling as she pressed play. The audio wasn't surprising. No, it was expected, like a bad dream she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. But the venom in Robyn's voice still struck her like a slap. Marty or complex Robyn had mocked self-sufficient, but can't even get Kody to text her back. Janelle didn't flinch. She laughed, a small, bitter sound. Not because it was funny, but because the lie was finally out in the open, unzipped and gasping. For years, Janelle had carried the burden of being the rational one, the practical wife, the peacekeeper. She didn't play victim. She didn't demand attention. She sacrificed, adjusted, endured. And all along, Robyn played queen behind the curtains, pulling strings, weaponizing tears, sculpting herself as Kody's only emotional home. But now, the illusion had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Christine's call lit up her screen. "Have you heard it?" she asked. Voice tight, Janelle whispered every word. There was no need for more. The lies, the triangulations, the years of pretending dismantled in minutes by Robyn's own mouth. And suddenly, Janelle didn't feel bitter. She felt released, as if someone had cut the final thread tying her to a false narrative. "It was never about love," she muttered to herself. "It was about control, and now even he can't stomach her." The words didn't come from malice. They came from clarity. For the first time, she wasn't analyzing Kody's moods, managing the fallout, or hoping he'd remember she existed. She was watching the tower fall from the outside, not from under the rubble, and that changed everything, because once you stop justifying someone else's mistreatment, you're no longer part of their story. You're the one writing your own. And Janelle, in that instant, picked up the pen. Meri stared out the window of her quiet B&B, the folded transcript resting beside a half-finished cup of tea. The words printed in black ink felt heavier than anything Kody had ever said to her face. Tragic Victorian ghost. That wasn't just insult. It was annihilation. She'd heard cruelty before from Kody, from fans, even from herself in the mirror on lonely nights. But hearing it from Robyn, the one she had once defended, that tore something irreparable. Her breath caught not from heartbreak, but from something sharper awakening, because beneath the grief there was fury, not theatrical rage, not a public meltdown, but a low, simmering burn. Meri had been sidelined for years, used for optics, tolerated at best, erased at worst. Still, she had stayed. She showed up, put on the face, kept the peace. She even convinced herself that Robyn saw her as a sister. But now it was clear she had been nothing more than a placeholder, someone to discard once her usefulness expired. She opened her laptop with a steadiness she didn't know she possessed. Not to write a brand update or a B&B promo. This time it was personal, raw, unfiltered, a digital mirror for herself. "Not the viewers, I'm not a ghost," she said, her voice calm and deliberate, "and I'm done performing silence." There was no flourish, no tears, just truth. And that was enough, because the wound wasn't that Robyn said it. The wound was that Meri had believed, even after all this time, that she mattered to her, that loyalty meant something, that decades of sacrifice wouldn't end with a smirk and a mic still hot. But now the fantasy was dead, and in its place, something stronger was stirring. Not revenge, not bitterness, just resolve. Meri wasn't going to disappear. Not this time. Janelle's boots hit the pavement with the weight of finality. No producers, no handlers, just her. A print out of the transcript folded in her coat pocket and a purpose burning behind her steady eyes. She wasn't here for drama. She was here for clarity. Robyn had called her a martyr with a complex. After everything Janelle had endured, raising kids practically alone, enduring emotional neglect, navigating a family that always put her last. Now she was being mocked by the woman who benefited most from her silence. The door opened and Robyn stood there, arms crossed, eyes puffy but guarded. It wasn't the kind of grief Janelle could respect. It was self-pity, and Janelle had seen enough of that to last a lifetime. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, Meri a step behind her, solid as stone. They didn't speak until they were seated at the same wooden table that once held holiday meals and family meetings. Only now it was a battleground. Janelle's voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. You don't get to cry and play the victim while ridiculing the women who built this family. Robyn flinched. Meri followed her voice, trembling but firm. You called me desperate. You thought I wouldn't find out. Say it to my face now. Robyn stumbled, stammered, her usual rehearsed sincerity nowhere to be found. What followed wasn't an argument. It was a reckoning. Janelle didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her calm exposed more truth than a storm ever could. She laid it out. The years of being minimized, the sacrifices ignored, the grief swallowed. Robyn tried to defend herself, but the words rang hollow. She wasn't sorry she was cornered, and for once, no one was rushing to protect her. This wasn't reality TV anymore. This was reality, period. Outside, the air was colder than expected. Meri pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, while Janelle exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for years. The confrontation hadn't ended with an apology. There were no warm embraces or promises of healing, but something unspoken had shifted, a release, a liberation. For the first time in decades, they weren't competing for scraps of affection from a man who weaponized silence and loyalty. They weren't playing roles in a show that had outlived its purpose. They had finally spoken not just to Robyn, but to themselves. Inside, Robyn sat slumped at the table. Her tears came now, not in manipulation or defense, but in disbelief. She had been left with her words. Words she thought no one would ever hear, words that once gave her power. Now they were shackles. There was no spin that could save her. Not this time. Her husband had heard her mock the very women he once claimed as his spiritual partners, and worse, he hadn't defended her, not truly, not anymore. Kody, miles away, listened to the audio again in silence. No commentary, no fury, just the realization that the empire he built on emotional debt and obedience had collapsed from the inside. The wives weren't turning on him. They were leaving the script, rewriting the story. He hadn't just lost a marriage or a show. He had lost the illusion of control. Janelle and Meri didn't look back as they walked toward their cars. For too long, their power had been buried beneath respectability and quiet suffering. Now, in the wake of betrayal, they stood unshaken. Not because they were healed, but because they were finally honest. They weren't wives anymore. They were witnesses, survivors, and they weren't asking for a seat at the table. They were flipping it over. The aftermath didn't come with fireworks. It came with stillness, a strange, unfamiliar calm. For Robyn, it was the sound of her own breath echoing too loudly in a house that once buzzed with the chaos of blended family life. She sat there, phone dark, no more. Producer calls, no more sister wives texting about holidays or birthdays, just the quiet recoil of isolation finally catching up. For years, she had spun herself into the center of a universe held together by borrowed affection and staged grace. But universes collapse when gravity fails, and Kody's silence was the loudest collapse of all. He hadn't left her, but something had. That unshakable pedestal she thought she owned, it cracked beneath her. She remembered his words, "My defense of you is over, not rejection, something worse. Detachment." A man who once rewrote family rules for her now couldn't even meet her eyes, and that terrified her more than the wives ever had. Meri returned to her bed and breakfast in heroin, not triumphant, not even relieved, just changed. She poured tea that went cold, but this time she didn't wait for someone to drink it with her. She drank it herself. Janelle went home to a different kind of silence. Not the bitter kind, the kind that comes when you're finally alone with your choices and don't regret them. Her kids texted her memes. She laughed out loud. It was simple, but it was enough online. The clip continued to spread. Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. But for the women who lived it, virality was irrelevant. The real power wasn't in the leak. It was in what happened after. They didn't just expose Robyn. They reclaimed their voices. Kody didn't just lose control. He finally saw what control had cost. And somewhere in that reckoning, a new story began. Not filmed, not scripted, not sold, just lived. The truth leaked, the house cracked, and for once the women didn't break, they broke free. If you felt that shift, if you've watched these women be rewritten by someone else's script for too long, then hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more untold chapters and emotional deep dives, where we don't just spill tea, we rewrite the narrative.